Hey folks, my name is Mo Amir and this is VANCOLOUR, British Columbia's bona fide culture and politics TV talk show right here on Check and Check Plus. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Tonight, with 40-year high inflation, interest rates rising at a pace not seen since the 1980s, and slowed economic activity in key sectors like housing, are British Columbians in for tough times? Will it be a soft landing or a lost decade? Let's also dig into the province's leadership. What can we expect if, and most likely when, David Eby becomes the Premier of BC? Huge topics, but we got a huge guest, and he's here for the entire show. He was a BC NDP MLA in the city of Vancouver from 1986 to 2001. He served as the 31st Premier of BC between 1996 and 1999. Currently, he is the President and Chief Operating Officer of the Jim Pattison Group, the multi-billion-dollar business conglomerate headquartered right here in Vancouver, where he has worked for over 20 years. He is Glen Clark. Mr. Clark, what an honor that you're here. I got to ask you a question right off the bat. Is it weird that you, as the Democratic Socialist Premier of BC, now run a multi-billion-dollar business, whereas someone like Gordon Campbell, also a former BC Premier, who is all about small government and free enterprise, enjoys a cushy government job?
It's only weird if you look at the caricatures that the media pretend really about the NDP and the Liberals. I mean, people are people. Yeah. And so just because you're a member of the NDP doesn't mean you're not competent in business. And just because you're a business person doesn't mean you're not competent in working on social program policies as well. So I think it's just a bit of a caricature that's never been true.
A very diplomatic answer. Such a politician. Yeah. On the topic of caricatures, let's talk about David Eby. We're going to be a bit presumptuous. I think it's a safe bet that he will be the next Premier of British Columbia. But you hear these caricatures, right? From the right, it's either he's a radical activist. And then on the left, he's an establishment sellout. He's a status quo guy.
People are just so keen. They want to put you in this box.
You're still very much tuned into BC politics. When you look at a guy like David Eby, what do you think British Columbians should expect from his leadership?
First of all, I think he's terrific. I think he's very cerebral and reserved. And so he's a little different than we've had in the last while. But I think he is not a status quo candidate, which I like. He's a doer, and you can see in the areas that he had responsibility for, he took action. Whether you agree with him or not, he took action. And I'd much rather have a politician who takes action on problems, even if you disagree with it, than someone who doesn't do anything or occupies the chair. So I think David Eby's not there to occupy the chair. He's there to actually make things happen. I think that's good.
Right. Now, I've always seen David Eby as a bit of a solutionist, especially when he's in power. When he's in opposition, it was slightly different. So when we think about David Eby and him becoming Premier at a time when the province has such huge challenges, doctor shortages, affordability, what does he have to do to win the BC NDP another term in government when clearly he's not going to be able to solve these two issues in 2 years?
I don't think the public expects you to solve every problem, but I do think they expect action. And I think the area that's clearly, I think affordability, let me back up for a second. I think affordability is more challenging for a subnational government like a provincial government because it's subject to the Ukraine war and COVID-related supply chain problems, all of those things.
So he just has to be effective at blaming senior levels of government is what you're saying.
No, I think he has to concentrate on what he can control, which is healthcare. Healthcare and to some extent housing, but particularly healthcare is a provincial jurisdiction. Clearly we have challenges. Clearly he has to show that he cares and has to make progress on this very important file. And particularly for the NDP, the NDP government has to be good on healthcare. That's what people expect the NDP to be, good on healthcare, to do a job. And I think right now, and I don't really blame the provincial government for this, there's just so many challenges that are COVID related that are backing up into the system. But I think a new premier coming in has to show the people of British Columbia has a plan to deal with this and has to make concrete steps towards improving the situation for basic health care in British Columbia.
When we talk about his predecessor, Premier John Horgan, does it surprise you that he kind of rode off it with such popularity despite these big systemic problems like doctor shortages, like unaffordability, which has only gotten worse?
Well, timing is everything, I guess, in politics. But John is such a relatable guy. He's such a good guy and personable, and really, I think, had the pulse of the province. You know, I mean, he approved some things that were unpopular inside the NDP, but were popular in the province at large. You know, really good politicians aren't quite as partisan as they appear to be. They always are looking at where are the people. I remember Tommy Douglas one time when someone was talking about an issue, he said, well, go canvass, go door to door, knocking on doors in this neighborhood, and come back in 2 hours and tell me if you think the same way. In other words, you can't get too far ahead of the public.
Right.
Even if you're an activist government, even if you have lots of change you want to bring in, you can't get too far ahead of where the public are. And I think John really had a good sense of British Columbia. Been around a long time, worked for me, for crying out loud, and was elected for a long time, and traveled the province. Really had a good sense of it. So that's going to be hard to match because he really had a good way about him, and people just liked him, right? And I think his health challenges, you know, just brought an enormous amount of goodwill as well to him and to the government, as it should. And he's a super popular guy.
So really quickly, you've talked about Premier Horgan's strengths.
Yeah.
What are David Eby's weaknesses, do you think, politically, or at least his perception to the public?
Well, it's probably that. I mean, David is not John Horgan. He's not. He's more cerebral and very, I think, a very smart guy. And so his challenge will be to be more relatable with the people of British Columbia, particularly outside the Lower Mainland. You know, it's a big province, and sometimes, especially the media, or no, there's not a criticism of you. But,
you're pointing at me, so I'll take it personally. Thank you.
It's just that it's a big province. I mean, go to Williams Lake, go to Prince George, go to Prince Rupert, go to these towns, and it's a different feel with lots of issues and lots of challenges. And I think David is really much more of an urban politician. So he'll need to work on reaching out to rural British Columbians and really understanding their concerns.
Well, Glenn, I'm really enjoying this chat. We're going to chat about the economy in a bit, so sit tight because I have way more to ask you. Folks, don't go anywhere because after some business, let's talk about the economy. Is BC on the precipice of a housing crash? Is stagflation a very real possibility? Overseeing so many different business lines in various sectors, the president and COO of the Jim Pattison Group, former BC Premier Glen Clark, will give us his views up next. I'm Mo Amir. This is VANCOLOUR.